A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was thinking the other day about how much time we spend as a species, just translating things from one format to another. It is like we are all stuck in this constant state of administrative overhead. For the last decade, if you wanted a computer to understand a voice, you had to pay what I call the transcription tax. You take the audio, you crunch it into text, you lose all the soul and the tone, and then you hand that flat text to a model and hope it can guess what the person actually meant. But looking at the latest data and the releases coming out of Google today, on March 26, 2026, it feels like that tax is finally being repealed.
It is not just being repealed, Corn. It is being abolished entirely. We are moving into a world where the intermediate step of text is becoming optional, or in some cases, a hindrance. Today's prompt from Daniel is about an evaluation he just ran on Google's Gemini 1.5 Flash, and it really highlights this shift from what we call cascaded pipelines to native multimodality. Daniel ran 49 different analytical tasks against a single 20-minute audio file, and the results are honestly a bit of a wake-up call for anyone still building on the old speech-to-text stack.
It is interesting that he is focusing on the 1.5 Flash version. We have seen the release of the Gemini 3 series recently, including the 3.1 Flashlight preview that dropped just a few weeks ago, and the live version that came out today. But 1.5 Flash has remained this foundational benchmark because it was the first one to really nail that high-speed, long-context audio task at scale. Before we get into Daniel's specific Irish accented brain dump of a test, explain the architectural difference here for the listeners. When we say native multimodality versus a cascaded system, what is actually happening under the hood that makes it different from, say, sticking OpenAI's Whisper in front of GPT-4?
The cascaded system is like having a translator who only knows how to write down words but cannot hear the music. Whisper, or any traditional speech-to-text engine, listens to the audio and outputs a string of text. That text is all the large language model ever sees. So if the speaker is crying or being sarcastic, or if there is a loud siren in the background, the model usually has no idea unless the transcriber adds a little tag like loud noise or sobbing. Native multimodality means the model, in this case Gemini, is actually processing the raw audio waveforms directly. It sees the audio as a series of tokens just like it sees words. It hears the pitch, the cadence, the background hum of a refrigerator, and the specific timbre of a human voice all at once. It is not reading a script of the movie, it is actually watching the movie, or at least listening to it with both ears.
That is a great way to put it, and Daniel's test was pretty rigorous. He took a 20-minute recording of himself talking about everything from rocket sirens in Jerusalem to voice cloning and deepfakes, and then he hit the model with questions ranging from emotion detection to forensic audio analysis. What I find wild is that he used the Flash version, which is essentially the high-efficiency version of the Gemini family, and it still managed to navigate this massive context window. We are talking about a 1 million token context window. Herman, put that in perspective for us. How much audio can you actually fit into 1 million tokens?
It is roughly 9.5 hours of audio in a single prompt. To give you the technical breakdown, Gemini represents audio at a rate of 32 tokens per second. That is about 1,920 tokens per minute. When you have 1 million tokens to play with, you can feed it an entire workday of meetings in one go and ask it who sounded the most annoyed during the 3 p.m. sync. Or, to use a more scientific example, you could feed it a 5-hour field recording from a rainforest. A cascaded system would try to transcribe the chatter of the animals into text, which is useless. Gemini, because it hears the waveform, can actually identify specific bird species based on the frequency and pattern of their calls. It is a completely different level of data ingestion.
I would pay good money to have an AI tell me exactly who is being passive aggressive in my emails, so having it do that for audio sounds like a productivity dream or a social nightmare. But let's look at the benchmarks Daniel was referencing. In the technical reports, Gemini 1.5 Flash was hitting 99.1% recall in what they call the audio Haystack test. Explain what that test actually looks like in practice.
The audio haystack test is the ultimate stress test for long-term memory. You take hours and hours of audio, the haystack, and you bury a specific spoken phrase or a unique sound, the needle, somewhere in the middle. Then you ask the AI to find it and tell you exactly what was said or what happened at that timestamp. A combined Whisper and GPT-4 pipeline only hit 94.5% recall. That 5% gap might not sound huge, but when you are searching through 10,000 hours of call center logs or legal depositions, that is a lot of missed needles. The reason Gemini wins here is that it does not have to rely on a perfect transcription. If the needle was whispered or obscured by static, the text-based model might just see a gap in the transcript. Gemini hears the faint signal in the waveform itself.
It is the difference between searching a text document for the word bang and having a guard who actually hears a gunshot in a noisy warehouse. But how does a smaller model like Flash achieve this? Usually, when we talk about AI, bigger is better. We expect the massive pro models to be the ones with the best memory. How is Flash hitting these 99% recall numbers?
That comes down to two major technical pillars: online distillation and the mixture of experts architecture, or MoE. Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, has been very vocal about how they built Flash. It is not just a truncated version of Gemini Pro, it is online distilled, which means during its training it was essentially a student watching a teacher. It was trained to mimic the reasoning and multimodal understanding of the much larger Pro model, but within a more efficient parameter set. Then you have the MoE structure, which Jeff Dean has championed. Instead of the whole model firing for every audio token, it routes the data to specific expert layers. If it hears speech, it activates the speech experts. If it hears background noise, it routes to the environmental experts. This allows it to maintain that 1 million token window without the computational cost exploding.
So it is like a hospital where you have a general triage desk that sends you to a specialist immediately, rather than one doctor trying to do everything. That explains the speed, but what about the quality? Daniel's report mentioned that the API downsamples the audio to 16 kilobits per second and collapses it into mono. As an audio guy, that sounds like a nightmare. 16 kilobits is basically early 2000s internet radio quality. Does that not mess with the model's ability to do this forensic work?
You would think so, but the model is surprisingly resilient. It is trained on noisy data phone calls, compressed YouTube videos, old archival recordings. It has learned to look past the artifacts of compression to find the underlying signal. It is more interested in the shape of the sound than the perfect reproduction of every frequency. In Daniel's test, he asked the model to perform a speaker profile. Even with that 16 kilobits per second compression, it correctly identified his accent, his age range, and even his technical background based on the terminology he used. But more impressively, it could distinguish between his natural voice and the segments where he was playing back AI-generated voice clones of himself.
That is the forensic part that gets interesting. If the model can hear the artifacts of a voice clone that a human ear might miss, we are looking at a built-in deepfake detector. But I want to poke at the methodology for a second. Daniel's test used a single Irish accented voice. As we know from every voice-activated elevator joke ever made, Irish accents can be a notorious black box for traditional speech to text. Did the native multimodality help with the accuracy there, or does it still struggle with the lilt and the speed?
From what we see in the outputs, the native approach is significantly more robust. Because the model is not trying to force the audio into a phoneme to text map before understanding the meaning, it can use the context of the entire waveform to resolve ambiguities. If a word is mumbled or obscured by a siren, which Daniel actually had in his recording because he was recording in a conflict zone, the model can use the surrounding audio context to infer the word rather than just outputting unintelligible. It is also worth noting that Daniel's evaluation covered 13 different categories. We are talking about speaker demographics, health and wellness inferences, and even audio engineering tasks like identifying the frequency balance of the recording.
Wait, it can do EQ analysis? Like, it can tell you if your recording is too heavy on the low end, or if you have a muddy mid-range.
It can. It can describe the acoustic environment. In Daniel's test, it correctly identified that he was in a small residential room. It picked up on the lack of reverb and the specific noise floor. This is where the weird in my weird prompts really shines. Most people think of an AI assistant as something you talk to, but we are moving toward a world where the AI is an expert observer of the audio itself. It is an audio engineer, a forensic linguist, and a sentiment analyst all rolled into one, and it is doing all of this for 15 cents per million tokens.
15 cents. That is the part that blows my mind. We are talking about 16 times cheaper than the Pro variant. At that price point, the economic barrier to audio mining just evaporates. You could have a system that listens to every single customer service call in real time, not just to transcribe them, but to flag when a customer's voice indicates they are about to cancel their subscription based on the tension in their vocal cords, even if their words are polite. That is a massive shift for business.
It is a total paradigm shift. Up until now, companies only analyzed a tiny fraction of their audio data because it was too expensive to transcribe and then process. Now you can just dump the raw audio into Flash. This leads us to the bigger landscape shift we are seeing here in March 2026, the move toward audio to audio, or A2A. We have been living in this world of suboptimal latency where you speak, the computer thinks for 2 seconds while it transcribes and processes, and then it speaks back. Google's release of the Gemini 3.1 Flash Live preview today is aimed squarely at killing that latency. They are pushing for sub 500 millisecond response times.
That is faster than the human brain's natural conversational gap in some cases. If you get below half a second, the uncanny valley of AI interaction starts to disappear. It stops feeling like a walkie-talkie conversation with a robot on Mars, and starts feeling like a real-time exchange. But this also brings up the privacy elephant in the room. Google's personal intelligence feature that launched last month allows these models to access your entire workspace, your Drive, your Gmail, and now, presumably, your recorded meetings and voice notes. If the model is this good at hearing things, it is hearing a lot more than just your grocery list.
It is hearing the background of your life. If you have a recording of a family dinner in your Google Photos, a native multimodal model could potentially identify that your uncle sounds like he has a persistent cough that might be worth checking out, or that your dishwasher is making a sound that indicates a failing pump. The health and wellness category in Daniel's report touched on this. He asked the model to infer the speaker's physical state. It picked up on his breathing patterns and vocal clarity. While that is incredible for personalized health monitoring, it is also a massive amount of data to hand over to a single entity. We are moving from Google knows what you search for to Google knows how you breathe.
It is the ultimate read the room technology, but the room is your entire life. Now, let's talk about how this fits into the broader AI ecosystem. You mentioned Gemini embedding 2 earlier. How does that change the way we actually use this audio data?
This is a massive piece of the puzzle that launched on March 10th. Gemini Embedding 2 is the first truly multimodal embedding model. In the past, if you wanted to do a search across your data, you had text embeddings for your documents and maybe some separate audio embeddings for your sounds. They did not speak the same language. Embedding 2 maps audio, video, and text into the exact same vector space. That means you can search your audio files using a text query or vice versa, and the model understands the semantic relationship across modes. If you search for sounds of tension, it can find a video of a heated argument, an audio recording of a violin string about to snap, and a text document about a geopolitical crisis. It is all one unified understanding.
That is a bit terrifying, but also incredibly powerful for organization. Imagine searching your entire life's recording history for that time. I sounded really happy, and having it actually work. But I want to go back to Daniel's specific test. He's originally from Ireland, living in Jerusalem. He's got this mix of technical jargon and casual speech. One of the categories he tested was language learning. How does a native audio model help with something like learning a dialect compared to a text-based one?
It is all about the prosody and the phonetics. A text-based AI can tell you how to spell a word and what it means, but it cannot tell you if your mouth is shaped correctly to produce the right sound. A native audio model like Gemini can listen to your attempt at a word and compare the waveform of your speech to a native speaker's waveform. It can say, "You are putting the emphasis on the second syllable instead of the first," or "Your vowel sound is too flat." It is the difference between reading a book about how to play the piano and having a teacher listen to you play and say, "You are hitting that key too hard." It is the difference between information and coaching.
And when you combine that with the sub 500 millisecond latency we are seeing with the live API, you basically have a real-time dialect coach in your ear. But Herman, what are the limitations? We talked about the 16 kilobits per second downsampling. Is there anything else developers should be wary of?
The main thing is that while it is great at speech and general environmental sounds, it is not a musicologist yet. Google has a separate model called Lyria for high-fidelity music generation and analysis. If you try to use Gemini Flash to analyze the subtle harmonic distortion of a tube amplifier, you are going to be disappointed. It is optimized for semantic audio sounds that carry meaning or information. Also, while the 1 million token window is huge, the model can still suffer from middle of the document loss if you are not careful with how you prompt it. You still need to be specific about what you are looking for in those 9 hours of audio.
So, if I am a developer listening to this, and I'm currently using a pipeline where I send audio to Whisper, get a JSON file back, and then send that to an LLM, your advice is basically, stop doing that?
Precisely. That is the core takeaway. If you are only interested in the words spoken, the old way is fine. It is cheap and reliable. But if you want to build anything that feels intelligent or empathetic, you are leaving 80% of the data on the table by using a text-only intermediate step. You are losing the emotion, the sarcasm, the ambient context, and the speaker's physical state. Using something like Gemini 1.5 Flash or the new 3.1 Lite allows you to query the audio directly. You can ask, "At what point did the speaker sound most confused?" Or, "Was there any background noise that suggested they were outdoors?" You cannot do that with a text transcript.
It is like trying to describe a painting to a blind person and then asking them to critique the brushwork. You are losing the primary source material. And that brings us to the audio haystack again. If you can only remember 10 minutes of audio, you do not have a haystack. You have a small pile of grass. Being able to cross-reference something said at minute 5 with a tone shift at minute 55 is where the real insights happen.
And that is exactly what Daniel's evaluation proved. He was asking questions that required the model to synthesize information from across the entire 20-minute recording. It was not just what did he say at the end. It was how did his attitude toward AI change throughout the recording. That requires the model to maintain a coherent understanding of his emotional state over time. It is a level of temporal awareness that we have never seen in audio processing before. It is almost like the model is developing a sense of personality for the speaker.
It is building a mental model of the human on the other end, which, again, is both cool and a little bit like a sci-fi horror movie depending on how you look at it. But let's look at the competition. We are focusing on Gemini because that is what Daniel's prompt was about. But how does this stack up against the other players? Is OpenAI or Anthropic doing this native waveform stuff as well?
OpenAI's GPT-4o was the first big move in this direction, but Google has really pulled ahead in terms of the context window and the cost efficiency with the Flash series. Anthropic's Claude 4.5, which we are expecting later this year, is rumored to have native audio, but right now, Gemini is the only one giving developers this level of long-form audio access for pennies. The 1 million token window is the real differentiator. Most other models cap out much earlier, which means you cannot feed them an entire hour-long podcast, let alone a 9-hour recording of a conference.
So, to wrap this up, the transcription tax is essentially dead. We are moving into the A2A era. What are the 3 things our listeners should take away from Daniel's experiment?
Number 1, stop building pipelines that rely on intermediate text transcription if you need more than just the words. You are throwing away the most valuable parts of the audio. Number 2, leverage these long context windows for what we call audio mining. Instead of just summarizing a meeting, ask the model to identify the moments of highest tension, or to flag when someone's tone contradicts their words. And number 3, audit your current stack. If you are still using Whisper for everything, you are likely losing a massive amount of non-verbal data that could be making your product better. The economic barrier is gone. 15 cents per million tokens means you can afford to be curious.
It is like we have been looking at the world in black and white and someone just handed us a color camera. Sure, the black and white photos were functional, but you missed the fact that the sky was blue and the grass was green. Moving to native multimodality is that color shift for audio. I can finally have an AI tell me exactly how many times I say and in this podcast, and then give me a sentiment score on my own jokes.
It would probably tell you that your jokes are consistent, Corn, which is a nice way of saying they are all equally cheesy.
I will take consistent. It is better than unintelligible. But in all seriousness, the future of the audio interface is here. We are moving away from the chatbot in a box and toward an omnimodal assistant that truly hears us. The race to sub 500 millisecond latency is the final frontier. Once we hit that, the distinction between talking to a human over a digital line and talking to an AI will become almost purely philosophical.
And that is a world we need to start preparing for, both in terms of how we build and how we protect our privacy. The tools are here, the pricing is right, and the models are getting smarter by the day. Daniel's evaluation of Gemini 1.5 Flash is a perfect snapshot of where we are right now, on the cusp of audio finally becoming a first-class citizen in the world of AI.
Well, I, for one, am ready for my AI sloth-to-human translator. If it can make me sound as smart as you think you are, Herman, it will be worth every cent of that 15 cent per million token price tag.
I think even Gemini has its limits, Corn.
Ouch. I felt the sentiment on that one without any help from a multimodal model. All right, I think we have covered the depth of Daniel's audio experiment. It is a fascinating look at the under-the-hood mechanics of how these things are actually hearing us.
It really is. And big thanks to Daniel for running these tests. It is one thing to read a Google white paper, it is another to see how it handles a real-world Irish brain dump in the middle of a conflict zone. It grounds the tech in reality.
And that is a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flemingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the research and generation of this show. If you want to keep up with these episodes, search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram to get notified the second a new one drops.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We will catch you in the next one.
Stay weird. Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth